US President Donald Trump announced that the US and Iran have agreed on a framework agreement extending the ceasefire for 60 days, and the official signing ceremony is expected on Friday, after which nuclear negotiations will begin. But at this stage, Trump announced that everything is virtual. Iran and the US have finally signed a Memorandum of Understanding, which finally halts this war in the Middle East. So, from this moment on, the Hormuz Strait should be opened, and the Americans are lifting their blockade of Iran. But now some very interesting negotiations are beginning, and no one knows how they will end. The oil market has already responded, causing oil prices to drop sharply. At the same time, Trump once again lashed out with criticism and even insults at Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And Trump publicly stated directly, quote, "Netanyahu has no common sense." But the deal with Iran is still in force. And Trump insists that actually the Israelis just don't understand anything, and this deal with Iran will only benefit them. But let's go through everything step by step. My name is Alexei Pechi. Before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write any comment you like. So, late Sunday evening, Donald Trump publicly announced that the US and Iran have finally reached a framework agreement that extends the ceasefire for 60 days. Within this period, negotiations on the nuclear deal will take place. The agreement is expected to reopen the Hormuz Strait, ease pressure on global energy markets, and create an opportunity for Donald to state that Iran and the US have finally reached a mutual understanding, which has become the biggest diplomatic breakthrough in the war and gives time for negotiations on unresolved issues. The agreement is intended to restore shipping through the Hormuz Strait, through which about 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas passed before the war. However, key nuclear issues still need to be discussed within the framework of the ceasefire, and I emphasize that this is not a peace agreement, no. This is a nuclear deal. Donald, we still haven't finalized the memorandum stating that we will negotiate. About a full-fledged framework agreement, and a comprehensive one that extends the ceasefire, according to Donald Trump's statements, this may not happen immediately. Demining, restoration, and security steps may delay shipping volumes from reaching pre-war levels. Negotiations on the nuclear deal are ongoing. Shipping volumes will eventually return to pre-war levels. But in fact, at this stage, the problem of the war itself is not being addressed at all. Donald Trump stated that in fact Iran is obliged to unblock the Hormuz Strait on its side, and the Americans are obliged to lift the blockade from Iran on their side. That is, all pre-war problems remain completely unresolved. And then what? On Sunday, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz finally reached a framework agreement, and he confirmed that yes, indeed, after 107 days of war, finally the US and Iran, about what? Which confirmed that yes, indeed, after 107 days of war, finally the US and Iran. Donald Trump stated that soon after this, the US will lift its naval blockade, and Iran still has not finalized the framework agreement that extends the ceasefire for talks. It was expected that the agreement would be signed electronically on Sunday after Pakistan's mediation, and as for the nuclear deal, it is still unclear. It was expected that the agreement would be signed electronically on Sunday after the mediation of Pakistan and Qatar. But it's still unclear if this has happened. Donald Trump stated that apart from the statement, in fact not even a statement but rather a post by Donald Trump on the social network Truth Social, there was nothing else. Sharif, who is the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and Iranian officials have only reached a preliminary agreement in Switzerland on a framework that extends the ceasefire. So, nothing has been officially signed yet. Nevertheless, Trump stated that the opening of the strait will only take place after the agreement is signed on Friday, and after that, negotiations on the nuclear deal will be held. Donald. The Supreme National Security Council of Iran stated that war and military actions on all fronts, including Lebanon, will immediately and permanently cease. Iran is still in a framework that extends the ceasefire within the framework. Negotiations on a final agreement will take place only after the other side fulfills its obligations under the Memorandum of Understanding. So the Iranians say, Donald Trump lifts the blockade, we start sending out our oil tankers, we see that it works, and only then will we fulfill our part of the deal. The agreement provides that the US and Iran will hold talks on uranium enrichment in Iran and on the disposal of highly enriched uranium. Days within a 60-day period. The US will discuss easing sanctions and unfreezing Iranian assets. At the same time, it is expected that the easing of sanctions will be linked to Tehran's compliance with the terms of the agreement. The ceasefire agreement applies to hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah on Sunday. Donald Trump lashed out at Netanyahu again, stating that literally within an hour they were supposed to sign the agreement, and the Israelis attacked Lebanon again. Trump resumed criticism, noting they had just agreed on a framework extension. Now, all sides are showing strength due to ongoing nuclear deal negotiations. Donald from Israel, and Iran was allegedly conducting operational preparations for an attack, with only a preliminary framework agreement reached, and with Pakistani mediators involved in all of this. They tried to prevent an Iranian attack on Israel, which would likely have triggered a nuclear response from Israel and could have completely derailed the deal. But in the end, Tehran officials managed to keep the situation under control. And as a result of all this, Donald wrote on the social network Truth Social, "The deal with Iran is done. Congratulations to everyone. I hereby fully authorize the duty-free opening of everything. Done. Congratulations to everyone." A final agreement was reached on a framework that extends the ceasefire for several days, with nuclear talks to follow. Minutes earlier, Sharif announced that a peace agreement between the US and Iran had been reached. Both sides stated that they had also finally agreed to a ceasefire on all fronts, including in Lebanon. Sharif said the deal is concluded, though not officially signed yet. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Kazem Garibabadi stated that the text of the Memorandum of Understanding has indeed been finalized. According to him, after the escalation of the conflict in Lebanon on Sunday, some changes were made that Tehran had requested to be included in the text of the Memorandum of Understanding. Donald Trump stated that changes should be included in the text of the Memorandum of Understanding. He also said that threats from the Iranian armed forces, quote, contributed to progress in the negotiations and helped finalize the text. All of Iran's armed forces, quote, contributed to progress in the negotiations and helped bring them to a conclusion. They finally agreed on a framework agreement that extends the ceasefire within the set terms. He stated that the armed forces were ready to give a decisive response, quote, that was his nuclear. Donald stated that the armed forces were ready to give a decisive response, quote, that was his. Kazem Garibabadi stated that negotiations on the text continued until about 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. That's what is meant. Well, and 15 minutes after that, Sharif announced that an agreement had been reached and the Prime Minister finalized it. Sharif stated that the other mediators also agreed to it. Prime Minister Sharif said Pakistan and other mediators will arrange a ceasefire this week, followed by technical negotiations under an agreed framework. Технические переговоры. Donald Trump will also meet with the leaders of the Persian Gulf countries at the G7 summit and stated that there will also be certain negotiations on this issue. They are giving themselves 60 days to achieve technical progress. They also finally agreed on how to reduce the uranium content in framework mixtures, as well as on measures that extend the ceasefire within the framework of the nuclear program. This isn't easy, given how hard it was to agree on a simpler memorandum of understanding. So once more, the current memorandum is only a framework agreement. This is simply to stop the war and open the Hormuz Strait. Donald Obake. Trump stated that Iran, because of the final framework agreement that began, is prolonging the war. The issues remain unresolved and they will be addressed within the framework of further 60-day negotiations. What happens next, no one knows. Once the negotiations are over and let's say a deal is made, the issues will be resolved within the framework of further 60-day negotiations. What will happen next, no one knows. When the 60 days are over and let's say no deal is made, what happens after that? There are no answers. There has already been a response to Trump's statement. What happens next? Not to such a statement by Trump, and on Sunday oil prices fell by more than 4%, reaching their lowest level in more than 3 months. That is, for almost the entire duration of the war. Well, Iran has not yet reached a final agreement as of the time of this recording. The global benchmark Brent crude oil dropped to $84 and negotiations on the nuclear deal will be held. By the time this episode is released on YouTube, the price will already be set. Donald Trump stated, and finally, I'll add one more very important point that should be mentioned here, because it's obvious that the goals of Iran, Israel, and the US have completely diverged. And unfortunately, many viewers of my YouTube channel, including Israelis, did not want to believe in the agreement that extends the ceasefire. The conflict between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu is not just escalating, but is already entering an open phase. And today, before announcing that the deal with Iran was concluded, Donald Trump said that Israel's strikes on Beirut were unnecessary, that they shouldn't have done it. He also claimed that Israel allegedly attacked Lebanon literally 1 hour before the agreement was signed. Iran is still in the framework agreement that extends the ceasefire, within which negotiations on the nuclear deal are being held. Before the agreement is signed, I should note that the agreement has not been signed yet. Donald Trump said he was shocked when advisors told him about the Israeli strike on Beirut and was furious with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He also mentioned Iran, calling the situation terrible. I just couldn't believe it. An hour before we were supposed to sign the agreement. Then Trump admits that yes, it was Hezbollah who attacked Israel first, but he emphasized that it didn't cause any damage and no one was killed. So why was there a need to respond? Well, yes, bombs from Hezbollah are falling on your head, but if no one was killed, it's not necessary to respond. And I'm not exaggerating. Here's another quote from Trump. Why did Bibi need to launch that damn attack? I was so angry, I made it clear to him. He doesn't have a shred of common sense. I made that clear to him. I mean, as you understand, Trump doesn't care at all about what's happening in Israel, about attacks in Israel. The main thing for him is to make his deal, which, by the way, is shaping up to be very unsuccessful, including for the United States of America. But Trump insists that no, the Israelis just don't understand, because for them, this deal will be simply phenomenal. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.